Welcome to the Two Boots Word Vault podcast. I'm Timothy Young. Today's episode is a recording of a story from the Pacific Northwest. This is a version transcribed from the Haida by the poet and writer Robert Bringhurst. I told this creation tale to the Fifth Direction community of men in Australia. I hope it's an enlightening story for you.
So I want to tell a story today that comes from the Pacific Northwest. And there are variations of this story all up and down the coast out there, all the way from Oregon and Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. But this story begins before there was anything. Before the great flood occurred and before it receded. Before animals ran on the land, before trees covered the earth, before birds flew through the trees, before even the fish and the whales and the seals swam in the seas. There was an old man who lived in a house beside a river, and he lived with his only daughter. But he didn't know if she was as beautiful as the frond of a hemlock against the spring sky, or if she was as ugly as a sea slug. But it didn't matter, because at that time, everything was dark. It was pitchy, inky dark, darker than midnight in the middle of winter. In the middle of a storm, it was so dark. So it didn't matter if he could see his daughter. And why was it so dark? Because that man had a box. And inside that box was another box. And inside that box was another box. And he had an infinite number of boxes. And in the smallest box, there was all of the light of the universe. And as he said, "It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. I won't even share it with my daughter." At that time, the raven was around, because ravens always been around. And he didn't care for this situation. He didn't care for stumbling around in the dark or flying around in the dark and bumping into things. The darkness interfered with him getting his food or finding and enjoying earthly pleasures. And of course, it really interfered with his desire to change things and make things chaotic. Well, in the dark, one day, he heard a voice. And he heard that voice saying something, echoing. And as he went near that echo, he ran into a wall. And when he ran into the wall, he could hear that the voice was on the other side of the wall. So he put his ear to the planks of the wall. And he heard, "I have a box. And inside that box is a box. And inside that box is an infinite number of boxes. And in the smallest of those boxes is all the light of the universe. And it's mine, and it's mine, and it's mine. And I'll share it with no one, not even my daughter." Well, when Raven heard that, he immediately wanted that box. So he felt his way around the house. He thought, "I have to get into that house." But as he felt his way around the house, every place he felt, it was smooth. There was a barrier between him and the inside of the house. And he went around and around. Tired after a while, he stepped back, and he could hear the footsteps going from the house down to the river. Well, those footsteps were on the opposite side of the house from where he was. So he moved around the house to the other side, but he still could find no door. He went around, he tried this many times, and every time he heard footsteps, whether it was the daughter going down for water or the old man going out for some reason, it was always on the opposite side of the house from where he was at. And he just couldn't find a way into that house. This went on for a while, and he finally decided he's got to ponder this a little bit more. He walked upriver a bit and sat down. And as he was trying to think about how to get into the house, he started thinking about that daughter. He said to himself, well, she might be as ugly as a sea slug, but she might be as beautiful as the frond of a hemlock against the dawn sky in springtime. And something stirred in him, something that was not his imagination. And he thought more and more about it. What can I do? What can I do? All of a sudden, because he was thinking about that woman, a plan developed in his mind. He transformed himself into a small hemlock needle, threw himself into the river, for he had heard the footsteps of the daughter going down to the river. And of course, he had been able to recognize her footsteps being different from the father's footsteps because he had spent so much time trying to figure these problems out. So he was in the water, and he started floating down the river. And the daughter was there with her water basket. And as she dipped her basket into the river, he let himself flow into the basket. Now, even though he was just a small hemlock needle, he still had some magic. So he made the woman thirsty. And because she was thirsty, with a basket of water, she took her hand and gulped down some water and swallowed the hemlock needle. And the hemlock needle went into her mouth, down, 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 into the warmest part of her belly. And he found a comfortable spot down there and transformed himself into a tiny human child. And he went to sleep. And then as he slept, he grew. This went on for a while. The woman didn't know what was happening. Neither did the old man, because it was so dark. How could you know? But one day, the old man sensed a third presence in the house, because Raven, as a human child, had emerged from the woman. What had emerged as a child was a human child, but he had a long nose like a beak. And bits of feathers grew on his skin. And he had bright, shiny eyes like a raven. And those eyes gave him an inquisitive appearance. How would we know that? It was dark. No one could see that. And the young child was noisy and loud. He had the cries of a spoiled child and the cries of an angry raven. But he also had those sweet little coos of baby human. And he had the gurgling sound of a young raven. And although the grandfather was so upset at the loudness of the cries, he fell in love with the sweet sounds that came from his grandson. And he fell in love with the grandson. And he started playing with the grandson. He made toys for the grandson. And he made up games so that they could play. As the grandfather grew more and more affectionate, wily Raven was planning how he was going to get into that box. He moved around the house in the dark, trying to find where the box was situated, and eventually he found it in a corner. He went and he opened the lid, but because the lid had a creak sound to it, the old man became infuriated, scolded that child, says, "You will never touch that again. That's off limits to you." The raven child closed the lid, and of course then complained loudly, cried like a spoiled child, "I want that, I want that." But the strategy in Raven was to complain and then to sweet talk Grandpa. And this went on for a while. And as with most grandfathers, if not all, eventually he relented when the young boy says, "All I want is the box, the first box, because it will make me completely happy." So the grandfather gave him that first box. And as it is with all, or at least most children, if not all, he eventually became bored with that box and asked for the second box. And again, the grandfather refused and says, "No, it's off limits. You can't have any more." The raven, as a human boy child, threw his temper tantrums and then cajoled with sweet words towards Grandpa and flattered him. And once again, Grandpa relented, gave him the second box. And this went on and on until most of the boxes were out of the big box. And all that was left were a few small boxes. But this radiant light was coming from these boxes. It was a radiance that gave some form and some shadows to the room. The raven child said, "Grandfather, what is giving off that light?" And the grandfather said, "Well, that's all the light of the universe." And the boy said, "I want that. I want to look at it. That's all I want to do. I just want to look at it. Please show it to me." And just as before, with the complaining and the whining, and then the cajoling and the sweet talking, this went back and forth, and eventually grandfather relented. And he reached in and he took from the smallest box a little ball of light. And as he brought it up, he threw that ball to his grandson. Then what happened, grandfather only caught a glimpse. In the light, grandfather saw this large beak open to catch the light. And large, enormous black wings filled the room. And when the beak closed on the light, The great wings swiped down and Raven flew right up through the smoke hole into the sky. When he got out of the house, the entire world lit up. The distant mountains became a silhouette. The river became broken reflections of light. And the ponds and the lakes, they rippled and skittered light all over. And Raven was filled with joy. He had all the light of the universe in his beak. And as he's flying around, he realized he would never again bump into trees when he flew. He knew that there was something that this light was giving him that was filling him with happiness and joy. Well, when the light first filled the skies, in the distance, the light hit the eye of Eagle. And Eagle, with his incredible sight, knew where he had to go to get that light himself. And he began to fly towards the Raven. And the Raven is just flying around, happy, joyful. And Eagle is coming closer and closer and closer. And because the eyes of the birds are on the side of their head, all of a sudden, Raven saw these large claws, these large talons reaching for him. And he swerved. And as he swerved, he dropped half of the light. And it fell down onto the rocks, broke into one big piece and innumerable tiny pieces. And they bounced back up into the sky. Today we know the large piece as the moon, and the small pieces are the stars. But Eagle was intent on getting the rest of the light. And he continued to chase Raven, and Raven kept flying and flying, flew out over the rim of the world. But he became so tired that he dropped the last half, which then floated on a cloud. And that cloud filled with light, this beautiful white light. And then the sun rose up over the eastern mountains. And when that light went in through the smoke hole, there was the old man. And he was sitting with his head in his hands, weeping, aching at the betrayal of his grandson, aching at the loss that he felt. But he looked up, and there was his daughter, who had absolutely no idea what had just happened. She was bewildered. But the old man looked at her and realized she was beautiful as the frond of a hemlock against the dawn sky in springtime. And he felt a little bit better. That's the story. But the story I've been carrying for 47 years. When I moved to Alaska in 1978, my brother gave me a print, a lithograph, and it's hung in my house. All of the different houses that I've lived in, it's hung there for 47 years. So I've been carrying this story in this picture for 47 years. Curiously, with all of the work that I've done with stories, for some reason or other, I never bothered to figure out more about this lithograph. And it was a year ago at the men's conference. We had invited Robert Bringhurst And Robert Bringhurst is one of the men who worked with a translation of this story. And until Robert Bringhurst arrived, I had no clue what this story was about. Raven steals the light. For some reason or other, this story was meant to come out. Earlier this summer, my brother-in-law, who's working with an organization promoting solar energy, asked me if I would tell a sun story. And all of these things came together at the same time. So I've been carrying the story, and I've told you the story. And now you can take that story elsewhere.